Thank you. As Nicole said, I am Sheila Jambakar. I'm Associate General Counsel at Twilio, and I oversee and advise our privacy program. So, without further ado, I am going to guess that these 4 letters are what most of you are here to hear about. I get it. Those 4 letters are looming pretty large for a lot of us these days, particularly with the May 25th, 2018 deadline just on the horizon for us. But just to make sure we're on the same page, is there anybody here who's not quite sure what GDPR is? Maybe you, okay, we've got a couple of hands out there. Great, brave souls. If you are not a privacy attorney, that's okay. You're okay not knowing what that is. So GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation. It replaces the existing Data Protection Directive in the EU. And in general, it really ups the ante for data protection in the EU in particular, but also worldwide. It's setting a higher bar for data protection with much stricter fines. We're talking about up to 20 million euro or 4% of your global turnover. So some serious fines there. And the new law becomes enforceable May 25th, 2018. Does anybody want a quick primer on whether or not your use of Twilio needs to be GDPR compliant? All right, I'm gonna I saw one hand there, great. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. If you communicate with EU individuals, EU data subjects, or about EU individuals, then and using Twilio, then your use of Twilio does need to be GDPR compliant. So this is a good room to be in. All right, without further ado, I'm gonna give away the punchline here. You're probably wondering, what do I have to do to make sure that my use of Twilio is GDPR compliant? The punchline is that most customers should not have to restructure or reconfigure or re-architect how they use Twilio just to be sure that we will process EU personal data in a compliant manner. So, hopefully people don't get up and leave at that point, because that's probably what most of you are wanting to know. But there's more to hear. So what I'd like to talk about today is about Twilio's approach to data protection overall, how we think about it. I'm then going to give you some insight into how we're going about tackling GDPR at Twilio. This is a really big topic, and it's really a work in progress as well. Anybody who tells you they've got this nailed down, they've got it all figured out, give them a little bit of that side eye, because nobody has this entirely figured out yet. Even the regulators are still kind of working through it. So this is a sort of insight into where we are today. I'm then going to suggest a way of approaching data processing that might help you when you're thinking about building systems and processes that process personal data. So I'm going to say up front, in the spirit of transparency, which is one of the principles of GDPR, that I'm probably not going to give you all the information that you would want to hear from Twilio about GDPR in a half-hour session. There simply is enough time. But we are planning to provide additional guidance materials in the weeks and months ahead on our website. So subscribe to our blog and keep checking back, because there will be some additional information there for you. Okay, so let's talk about our approach to data protection at Twilio. I believe to do data protection right, you can't just be tactical about it. You have to be strategic. So what do I mean by that? You heard that from Jeff this morning, that as a cloud company, perhaps our most important asset, maybe even more important than the really cool products and features we're building, is trust. If you don't trust us, you don't use us. And that's why at Twilio, we see data protection as more than just tactical compliance with the rules. Instead, it's a way to demonstrate that we're worthy of the trust that you put in us. If we focus solely on strict compliance with the letter of the law, and trust me, we do believe in compliance, it's important, but instead of using compliance to build trust, then we'd probably be taking a different approach to tackling data protection. By way of example, technically, GDPR compliance really only applies to EU personal data. So one way of tackling GDPR compliance is to segregate out all of your EU personal data from your non-EU personal data, and then focus all your efforts on compliance on that EU personal data. Well, we decided to put on our customers' shoes. We looked at GDPR and thought, though GDPR sets a very high bar for data protection, all of our customers want data protection when they're using Twilio. So we decided to let GDPR be an impetus to up-level our data protection on Twilio for all of our customers, regardless of where their end users are or regardless of where they are. All customers deserve a platform they can trust, not just our EU customers, although we love our EU customers. So generally speaking, our default will be that anything that we're building for GDPR, any of the work we're doing for GDPR, will be available to all of our customers. Also, if we focus solely on tactical compliance instead of building trust, we might prioritize not getting caught over getting it right for our customers. And what I mean by that is when you're tackling something as big as data protection, you're going to have to do some prioritization. You're going to have to make choices. So if we focused only on strict tactical compliance, we might make choices based solely on what we think a regulator might think or might catch us getting wrong. So if you think, well, a regulator won't catch me doing this wrong, then you might not focus attention on getting it right. Or perhaps if you think that you only have to convince a regulator that you're strictly complying, you miss in the process what your customers really need. So don't get me wrong, we do care deeply about what the regulatory authorities think. In fact, while I'm out here, I've been chatting with a few of them on this trip, but we just don't stop there. Frankly, I don't think the regulators are coming for Twilio on May 26, 2018, at least I hope not. But at Twilio, one of our leadership principles is to wear our customers' shoes. We take that so seriously. Those are actual shoes hanging on the wall at our headquarters in Twilio. That's as a reminder to all of us that we need to wear our customers' shoes. So wearing our customers' shoes, regardless of whether Twilio is likely to get caught by the regulator, you, our customers, need to know that we're able to support you and that we, your service provider, are not going to get in the way of your compliance. So when we're solving for data protection requirements, we're not just thinking, what will the regulator think, but also what will our customers think? What do our customers need? So I can't promise that we're always going to get that right. It's a work in progress. But I think if we focus on what our customers need and what's important to our customers when we're doing this compliance work, that at least we'll be rowing in the right direction. Okay, so the second reason why I think it's important to take a strategic approach and not just a tactical approach is that the world is moving in the direction of more data protection, not less. To be ready for the future, we can't think of data protection or GDPR compliance as just a one-time check-the-box activity. Remember that the fundamental human right to protection of personal data was recognized in Article 12 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights adopted by the UN General Assembly way back in 1948. So this is not just an EU thing. As a result, there are a set of consistent principles for data protection worldwide. So the seven on the screen here, are the data processing principles in GDPR. But you could look back on data protection frameworks going decades, and while the exact language of the principles might be slightly different or the exact number is different, the underlying concepts are largely the same. So the great thing about that is if you apply these principles when processing personal data on a global basis, you'll be well positioned for tackling data protection compliance frameworks that come down the road, the next one and the next one. So we see GDPR as an impetus for us to build a strong data protection foundation that we can build on for the future. And as new frameworks in various countries come along, we'll be better positioned to tackle the next one and the next one and the next one. All right, so I'm thinking that a lot of you are like, yeah, okay. So how exactly are you tackling GDPR? What exactly are you doing? How are you approaching that? So let's get into that. First, tackling GDPR for our platform, it's a multidisciplinary approach. It's a big project, and likely if you haven't started it yet, you will find that it will be a multidisciplinary project for your company as well. It demands close work between the people who really understand how the products and services work and the people who really understand privacy law and GDPR. Those are rarely the same people, and that was true for Twilio as well. Those weren't the same people. So we've formed a core team of our senior architects, our data platform team, our data compliance program manager who sits within the security organization, our CISO, our Chief Information Security Officer, and then myself from the legal team. And we spend a lot of time together these days, a lot. Given the breadth of this project, we knew that we really had to tackle it as a program. It really is a program because it is so holistic. So as a company, we did some initial work taking those broad principles and the broad generalized legal requirements of GDPR and then tried to think about how would those convert into engineering operations. And then we spent some time doing some data mapping because in order to tackle something as big as GDPR, you have to actually kind of see it. You need to know the scope of it. And that work on data mapping turned into an internal tool that we call Blackbird. And I'll show you that because I think it's really cool. All right, let's see if this works. Okay, so what you see on the screen here is Blackbird. And let's see if I can get over here. See if it works for me. Each of those icons on the screen represents a microservice within the Twilio organization. The color and the shape mean something to Twilio and its importance or what kind of data it's processing generally. There we go. So now, oops, there we go. That's not a good one. I need to pick a better, more interesting one. So if you click on the icon, what you can see is how they interconnect. So you see how the different microservices connect. So if you click on voice services, you see all the different microservices that are involved. You can see there's quite a bit of them. And then my favorite part is on the far left, we can filter it by the type of personal data that we're processing. So if I really want to know, okay, where is, let's see, fax metadata flowing through our system, I just click a button and there you go. And this is a great way to we got a 3D map. We have way too many microservices for us to be able to do this all in spreadsheets. So this was a much more useful tool, and it also, the great thing about this is it also goes towards the principle of accountability. So the principle of accountability under GDPR requires that companies that process personal data, that they document that they document their processing activities. Well, part of that is you have to know where the data is, and you need to know how the data flows through your system. So that's where Blackbird was able to come in. It not only helped the scope of the project, but it also counts as a step towards the project. All right. All right. All right, so now that we knew where the data was, the next thing we had to do was conduct a gap analysis. We decided to use a third party for this. That's not a requirement. We just decided that it would be helpful to get a second opinion on where we thought our gaps were. And then we spent a few cycles taking the results of that gap analysis and then trying to convert that into engineering operations projects. This is an iterative process. Frankly, it's still iterative. We're still kind of refining how we're going to go about tackling those gaps. And as an aside, this is why I think it's really important to start early. I think of it kind of like trying to remodel an old house. You have a plan, you think you're going to take a set amount of time, but when you start digging in there, you start taking down the walls, all of a sudden you realize it's going to be a lot more complicated than you think. So it's better to find out in September of 2017 that you're going to be able to get it done in 3 months and be GDPR compliant in 3 months than to find out in January that's going to take you 8 months, right? And then you're going to miss the deadline. So the earlier you start, the better off you are. Further, just as another aside, engineers, in my experience, really want to know what's right and wrong. When they're building something, they want to know that they're building the right thing. The unfortunate thing about GDPR is there's no precise right answer. The regulators will tell you that it's all about context, it's all about the risk analysis, so apologies to the engineers in the room. This is a judgment call. And that means it's really helpful to have your lawyer, your privacy professionals, your lawyers on speed dial because that's what lawyers do for a living. We make judgment calls. So you kind of have to paint the target of what you think in good faith is going to be compliant in the context of your business. You aim for that and hope for the best. And I think that this is actually where focusing on what's best for your customers is a good way to help focus your efforts. So the regulators are not going to tell you what they think is the right thing or the wrong thing. at least not in the specific context of your business. They're not going to give you that kind of detail. And you might go mad trying to get inside a regulator's head and figure out, well, what do they think about this? What are they going to think about that? But you probably know what your customers need and what is important to your customers. You don't really have to work as hard to get inside your customer's head because that's what you do every day as part of your business. So if you sort of help that in focusing, how are you going to tackle each of the tasks, I think that will help focus efforts. So from there, we're marching through the operational engineering projects with affected teams creating epics. And then we're tracking this as a program on a global basis with milestones along the way, and we're checking back on a regular basis. So now let's talk about one of the overall engineering operational projects that came out of this and our approach for how we solved it. Okay, so looking across the principles and requirements, data minimization, storage limitation, purpose limitation, and the right to be forgotten, one of the big projects that came out of all of these requirements together was we really needed to do a deep dive on retention and deletion. This is a big one, and when we've talked to other companies that are tackling GDPR, this seems to be a big one for a lot of companies. Frankly, cloud companies have been focused on architecting not to lose your data, right? That's what we've been focusing our architecture on. Now we kind of have to flip the script a bit and think about, well, how do we get rid of data we don't want or don't need, but make sure we don't lose the data we do. At a high level, the overall concept is pretty straightforward here. Collect and keep only what you need, delete what you don't need, and if an individual says, hey, I want you to delete my data, and you don't have a better reason for keeping it than they do for deleting it, delete it. Easier said than done. So looking across our tools, in terms of things that we already offer our customers, we do offer our customers the ability to delete personal data in the context of the content of communications. So we already offer certain tools like HTTP delete that allow you to delete the message bodies, voice recordings, MMS pictures. We generally offer that functionality. But we needed to make sure and document for the accountability principle that all of our products and services can support that functionality. We also already offer, just as a heads up for people who might not be aware, on our programmable SMS product, a message body redaction product, which allows you to choose never to have Twilio store the contents, the message bodies of SMS messages that you send through programmable SMS once it's been transmitted. So once it sort of hits the other end of the pipe, we don't store that for you, if you so choose. And we also offer a phone number redaction product, which will redact the last 4 digits once that transmission has occurred. So a couple of products that are already available. The trickier part of this project, frankly, is tackling this for personal data that we, Twilio, need for our own business purposes. And that does include a lot of the metadata that is a part of communications that are sent through Twilio. We need that for billing, for interconnection payments, for tax and audit purposes. So that data is used by a variety of internal systems for a variety of purposes, not just our customer-facing systems. And so we have to be sure that we're deleting that data as well when we no longer have a business need for it. And we have to do so in a systematic way that's documented and auditable. So this could be keyed off an account closure or an account deletion request. And since we are an API company, we solved it by building ourselves an API. So our architects are building an API where it will have the deletion trigger. The services that process personal data hook into that central API and receive the deletion trigger. And then when they complete the deletion, they send a communication back to that central service saying, we've deleted, to confirm. So now we've got the audit trail as well. This project really reaps dividends, frankly, for GDPR compliance and data protection overall. For one, just on cost savings, frankly, the less data you have, the less data you have to worry about storing, the less data that you have to worry about securing, right? That's less money overall. It also forces you to think about why you're processing personal data, why you need it. So we are using this to help us document our processing activities, which we need to do for the accountability principle under GDPR. It also encourages data minimization because it disincentivizes our services, our smaller teams, to process personal data. One way to solve this issue of how are we going to tackle GDPR for a team within Twilio is to say, let's just not process personal data at all. If they don't need to process the personal data, then they can kind of get out of the whole GDPR mess by saying, well, we're not going to process it. So it has encouraged teams to really reconsider whether they really, really, really have to process that personal data. Is there another way to get the same information without having to collect or process that personal data? Other teams decided that they could shorten up the retention period on their service for personal data. So as a company, we have decided that we're going to target that once a deletion is triggered, that services should complete the deletion within 30 days. We picked 30 days because it seems like a reasonable time period. We also don't want to shut down the services because we're trying to process deletions, right? That we want everything to continue to run properly and smoothly for all of our customers. So we set that as our deadline. What that means, though, is we've got some services that have said, we don't really need personal data for more than maybe a week. So let's just build an automatic reaper into our service that gets rid of the personal data after 7 days, and then if they receive a deletion trigger, there's no additional work they have to do to complete that deletion within 30 days. It just kind of naturally occurs, and they return back saying, yes, we've completed that deletion. So it, again, encourages data minimization. So this leads into my last section of the session, which is approaching processing personal data differently. So at Signal in San Francisco in 2016, I was on a panel. We were discussing law enforcement requests and data processing. And one of the things that I said was that there should be, perhaps, we should consider processing and collecting less personal data, that perhaps less is more. In this very data-driven age, there was an audible gasp from some in the audience. Now, I'm not sure I would get that audible gasp in this audience, but there was back in 2016 in San Francisco. But I think that when it comes to personal data and applying a lot of the principles around data protection, a good approach is to kind of think about personal data and processing personal data like handling something that's highly valuable, but also incredibly dangerous, like radioactive material, like uranium. So hear me out on this. So first, both personal data and uranium come in different degrees of risk, right? For uranium, you've got your low enriched uranium, and you've got your highly enriched weapons grade uranium. It's uranium. You're going to apply a standard of care to all uranium, but you're certainly going to be even more careful with your highly enriched weapons grade uranium. The same can be said about personal data. It comes in different risk levels. So all personal data should be handled with a certain degree of care. But when we're talking about your low enriched personal data, so maybe it's an email address, you handle with a certain level of care. But certainly when you're talking about your highly enriched weapons grade personal data, health data, personal or religious beliefs or political opinions, stuff that's very sensitive, you're going to want to apply a higher degree of care and with your handling of it. You have to be extra careful. Second, in both cases, personal data and uranium, the less you handle it and move it around, the better off you are. The less you handle it and touch it and move it from place to place. So if you were holding a stockpile of uranium, you're not going to have your employees moving it around all the time, right? Because you're going to leave little bits of uranium all over the place, and it might leak from one of the less secure locations. Same goes for personal data. If you're moving your personal data around your system all the time, you're more likely to leave little bits of it behind, and it might leak from a less secure location. So the less you handle it, the better. Also, if you handle uranium, you should have a plan on how to dispose of it properly, right? You're not going to be someone carrying around uranium and go, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. Same goes for personal data. You need to have a plan to dispose of it properly. You don't just toss spent fuel rods in the trash, and you don't just toss personal data in the trash either. You have to dispose of it properly. Third, you're not going to stockpile uranium unless you have a need for it, right? I'm not out there being like, I'm just going to gather up a bunch of uranium. I'll come up with something to do with it someday. Yeah, I'll figure it out. We'll just collect it. We might need it later. Well, same applies to personal data. You're not supposed to collect it, and you should not collect it unless you know why you need it and you can articulate a need for it. Similarly, if you have a pile of stuff, dirt, say, and you knew that there was radioactive uranium in there, you're not going to just take it all and dump it over here and we'll say, we'll sort it out later. Don't dump a bunch of your personal data in logs either. And figure that you'll figure it out later when you figure out what you need them for. Don't be a log dumper. Fourth, you better keep track of where your uranium is at all times. You don't want to be the guy who lost the yellow cake. Well, you don't want to be the guy who lost the personal data either. So that's for us where Blackbird comes in. It helps us keep tabs of our personal data. You also want to have well-trained people handling uranium, right? You've got to train people to handle it properly. The same goes for personal data. You have to train your people how to handle it properly. No single person can be in charge of all the personal data. It's just not how systems work. So that's why at Twilio, everybody has to get trained on processing personal data. They're trained on privacy and security. And we do that annually as in addition to when people onboard. And it's an important part of this because we're all kind of in this together. We're all stewards of it together. And another thing, if you're going to be asking a service provider to handle your uranium for you, you better trust that service provider, right? You're going to want a special contract in place to make sure that they're following strict rules on how you process your uranium and what you do with your uranium. And that same goes for service providers that you use for handling personal data, like Twilio. So that's why Twilio is now offering an updated data protection addendum to our customers who use this for processing EU personal data. You can, it's updated for GDPR, and you can make a request to get a copy of that starting today. It's on our blog, so check that out. So while data protection may be strategic, let's recap some of the tactical and practical takeaways regarding using Twilio in the era of GDPR. So most customers should not have to reconfigure or restructure how they use Twilio just to make sure that Twilio processes EU personal data in a GDPR compliant manner. That does not mean that we've taken care of it for you. No service provider can take care of your GDPR compliance for you. This is a shared responsibility. A lot of it is going to still mean you have to do work on your own side, but we are trying at Twilio to make that easier when you're using Twilio. We're now offering a GDPR-ready data protection addendum, which you can request starting today. So if you are processing EU personal data through Twilio, you're going to want to have that in place before May 25th, 2018. So you have time, but if you want to get a jump on that, you can start making a request for that today. And then lastly, keep an eye out for additional guidance and blog posts in the upcoming weeks and months ahead, where we're going to do more deep dives down to certain topics around GDPR and using Twilio. So thanks for coming and listening, and I hope you got something that's useful. I will be hanging out here for a while after, so if you've got questions, you can come try to find me. Thank you very much.